I've wanted an MCU game for a decade now, and on paper, it still seems somewhat mystifying it took as long as it did for one to metastasize on the games market. Again, on paper, a game based on the most popular comic book action movie franchise on the planet seems like a slam dunk and a no-brainer. As the MCU continues to grow and expand both in terms of characters and stories to tell, and in global popularity as a brand, the fit with video games seems more and more natural. But last year, Square Enix dropped the Avengers game, and for a variety of reasons, it seems nobody is playing it. Sensationalist YouTube hyperbole about games aside, the game is already something of a failure, even if it manages to have a strong second act in the future. But this game really surprised me. I started with 10 hours of game time, eventually beating the main campaign at about 15 hours, and then I played 30 hours and 50 hours, and I kept expecting myself to fatigue on the broken loot system and the wonky RPG mechanics that were so notorious online. But something I didn't expect happened. I kept playing, and playing, and playing a little more. And by the time I really, truly stepped away from the game for a real stretch of time, I was over 130 total game hours in Marvel's Avengers. That's not only about 4 times as much as I ever really expected to play the game given its notorious reputation and admittedly broken state that was a slog to play through initially, but it's pretty exceptional value for a game that I got just a few months after launch for half price, $30 during a Steam sale. And if you were to write down all the desirable attributes of an Avengers game, this title actually feels like, to me, it checks most of those boxes. You want to play as your favorite core Marvel Avengers? Check. You want them to feel distinct and have unique movement and fighting mechanics and upgrades despite having nearly identical controls? Check. You want to be able to play with a squad of friends and team up like the Avengers in the movies and the comics? Check. And you also have to think that there's going to be light RPG and progression elements with power-up mechanics, and it's going to be an action game. And at its core, this game is. It's all of those things. If you were to ask me what my perfect Avengers game would be back in 2015 or 2017, even after the game was announced, I honestly would have described something that feels and plays very similar, if not borderline identically, to the game that was released in 2020. This is also what confuses me because when I read reviews about the game, you get the sense that people don't like the game itself. But the more I parse the language, it feels to me like the game, the thing you actually play holding a controller or with a keyboard, is fine. It's all the systems around it that people don't seemingly like. And I'm here today to lobby on behalf of what Crystal Dynamics has made, to tell you that if you just want to have some shallow, casual Marvel fun, that none of that stuff matters all that much. And yeah, I'll admit up front, the loot, the RPG mechanics are a little broken in a pretty simple way. They don't feel rewarding. And I'm actually writing another script I've been working on for nearly 3 months that dives into the question of what do we want from looter shooters and looter games at large. But much of the findings I've discovered applies to the Avengers as well. The long and short is that loot games as a genre, aka games where you repeat the same content over and over ad nauseum trying to unlock rare items and improve your character, that loot loop, that feedback between player and reward, is everything in terms of the wider perception about the game, but also whether or not it survives long term. But put that aside for a moment, because yeah, it's broken in the Avengers. The loot is invisible. You never get to see your characters wearing any of it, because character costumes and appearances are tied to cosmetics. So finding an exotic hammer for Thor doesn't change his hammer, it just makes you more powerful, or maybe gives you some passive buffs or power-ups to attacks, but it never feels like it influences gameplay in a way that is as dramatic as I think was as intended. I've played through quite a few hero solo hives with max level characters, and I can safely say that better gear mostly just improves your overall powerfulness. You get stuff like pim particles on gauntlets or weapons to make enemies shrink on critical hits, or maybe Stark technology shields that explode to protect you when you take too much damage, but it's all relatively minor stuff in the bigger picture. It's nothing that I really had builds for or felt like I needed to optimize at any point other than what was most powerful, and boring loot is the most cardinal of all sins in a loot game. Long story short, the loot is broken. So, at face value, the biggest addictive quality of the genre is missing from the title. But what about the rest of the game? The action, the co-op, the campaign, all these things are pretty great when they work, which thankfully lately has been more or less always. Yes, I found that with some aggressive tweaking in the game's graphical settings and some generous patches that the game is finally in a pretty stable state, and I'm really enjoying it. As a beat 'em up slash action game, the controls feel really good, and each character, despite having nearly identical controls for combat and movement, have unique, specific traits that make playing as different heroes feel like you want it to feel. Thor and Iron Man dart across the sky, shooting lightning and lasers, and Ms. Marvel slides in and out of mobs, swinging limbs like wrecking balls. Black Widow comes in packing multiple guns and grenades for ranged and AoE combat. All this stuff is great. It's both fun and functional, and as far as I'm concerned, it's really the core thing I wanted in an Avengers game. I want playing as the Avengers to feel like the Avengers individually, and I want to be able to play it with friends. And the game does both of those things extremely well. The biggest aspect of the Avengers that I felt growing on me more and more over time was how much fun each individual character felt to play. And I'm not the type of guy to have a max level character of each class in Destiny or MMO games with multiple RPG classes. In most games, I'm very content to just beat the thing and call it good. But playing hours of the same missions with the Avengers didn't get as stale for me as I expected it to because I kept falling in love with new characters almost every week. First, I started playing mostly as Iron Man, but once I fatigued on his glass cannon approach, I switched to Hulk and started mindlessly smashing for a bit. Next thing I knew, I was flying around with Kate Bishop and upping my range game with Hawkeye. I moved back to flying with Thor, and then back to the ground with Ms. Marvel, who is my favorite character so far and the one I've spent the most time playing. I've put in the time to nearly max out Black Widow and Captain America as well. It's safe to say the diversity and nuance of the characters, despite some of the more common archetypes, was where I found the most enjoyment in the experience. Furthermore, I'm a big sucker for any game that really nails flying controls, and the Avengers is easily my second favorite game in this regard, right behind the now dearly departed Anthem, Rest in Peace, My Sweet Prince. Iron Man and Thor wouldn't feel right if they felt at all restricted in terms of movement, and they don't. The shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line, and it's not long before you'll find yourself pinging from enemy to enemy, soaring through the air, switching directions, and changing momentum with incredible speed and acrobatic precision. It's really fun. The Avengers is fun to actually play. And I've said shallow, I'm going to say it again, shallow gameplay, because I don't think this is a game that gives the same kind of hit as true loot games where the goal is basically hunting rare drops ad nauseum. The treasure isn't the reward in the Avengers, it's getting Iron Man to champion status and being able to tear through challenging activities, cycling rapidly between abilities, feeling limitless in your power. I honestly think that at its best moments, The Avengers is one of the purest superhero games ever made. It does hero wish fulfillment as interactive art extremely well. And for the record, while I wouldn't say it's the most fulfilling combat system of all time, it very much does the job. And once you max out the skill trees for each character, you feel like you have a diverse and powerful repertoire at your disposal. As a controller-based action game, I'd say this is way above average in just terms of game feel, maybe even top tier for a beat 'em up. Oh yeah, and have you guys seen this game? I don't want to talk about the graphics too much, but I'll just say that on a good rig and with your graphics settings properly tuned, this is one of the most beautiful, vibrant games on the entire market. The materials in particular are incredibly detailed and beautiful in motion, especially on the higher quality settings, and there's a fidelity that I'm consistently impressed with several months in. So let's say for a second that I've persuaded you, that you've been eyeing this game for months and my endorsement has piqued your curiosity. But you ask, isn't this game dead? Is anyone even playing it? Is it getting any more content? Is it even still a live service game? And well, the short answer to all those questions is kind of. Yes, people are still playing it. You can expect to wait in quick match for a few minutes at a time outside of peak hours. Yes, it's getting more content, at least in the form of Black Panther and the PS4 exclusive Spider-Man, though beyond that, I think it's very much a question mark. It's still a live service game, though given the game's state currently, the reality of having lost money hanging over it, I could see paid expansions in year 2. And yeah, they said they wouldn't, and maybe they'll do more free stuff in the Black Panther mold if it revitalizes the game, but none of that is certain. And about those expansions. Moving forward, I think the expansions the game puts out need to be a certain size in order to have the type of impact Square Enix is looking for in terms of bringing buzz back to the game. I think a new enemy faction with a new boss fight and a new mini storyline with 2 new playable heroes in the vein of Hawkeye plus Kate Bishop or maybe Black Panther plus Shuri is the sweet spot. New enemy types, a new area, and new heroes all add much needed diversity to the game, even if it's mostly just skin deep. And over time, a few of these expansions will add up, and suddenly the game looks like a much more interesting package. The Black Panther expansion plus, say, Multiverse of Madness expansion with Doctor Strange and Scarlet Witch, or some of the Disney Plus stuff like Moon Knight, She-Hulk, Winter Soldier, Falcon, Vision, Loki, and that's all just stuff in the immediate term that can sync up. Several of the above names are already rumored, as well as War Machine, who could be paired with Ironheart or Armor Wars, and that's not even touching on the potential of the Cosmic Marvel stuff. Ghost Rider, Thor Love and Thunder, The Eternals, Guardians of the freaking Galaxy, which kind of already looks like it maybe started as an expansion to this game and was spun off into its own thing. And X-Men, people, gamers, gaming people, please, I want this game to survive so Rocket Raccoon can get his own mission line. Heck, give Groot a character. Maybe switch things up and do a palette swap where everybody gets a villain skin and a villain mission to match. Have a game where you get wild and do it cel-shaded like the Spider-Verse. The Avengers game isn't a great looter, but as a foundation for a larger game that tells different comic book stories within these graphics and these sandboxes and these controls has so much potential. Treat this game like a platform for different comics and stories and styles. I'm begging you. And yeah, the Wakanda expansion looks great. Like exactly the breath of fresh air the game needs. But it needs this exact same type and scale of content injection on a much more frequent basis. Frankly, it's already fallen way behind in that regard, and opportunities to do something meaningful crossing over with current MCU stories like Loki, Falcon and the Winter Soldier, Shang-Chi, Black Widow, and even the Eternals would require that content was already released or in active development. We did technically get a Black Widow event in the game, but it wasn't the substantive tie-in that it could have been. Heck, I'd have been pretty stoked with just like a single unique mission that literally wasn't just the harm room with red lighting. And if Square Enix sticks with Crystal Dynamics with the Avengers, they can do some really impressive corporate synergy stuff in terms of cosmetics and storylines within the MCU and the game, and that should ultimately be the goal. That would give this game and its players a real reason to stick around for the long haul, even if there will be downtime in between big releases. It fits a natural season-specific model. I strongly believe that much of the negative reaction to the Avengers game had to do with the expectations and the presentation of monetized elements getting so much attention. The incredibly positive reaction to the Outriders demo and the warm reception that the game got at launch to me was a reflection of an appreciation from the community that the game was upfront in being a limited, finite experience with the potential for more, not a promise for much else. I wonder if the Avengers had sold itself on the strength of its story campaign first and foremost, as a great comic book game, if that would have led to a different reaction. Because what's here in that regard is good. And again, I can't stress enough how much I like this game. It's a little mindless, a little button mashy, a little basic, maybe a lot. But it's also a rock solid Avengers action game I can play with my friend. And that counts for a ton in my book. And it actually has a great Marvel story worth playing. I want this. Let's call this MGU, the Marvel Gaming Universe, to expand and grow like the cinematic universe it's inspired by has. I feel like in the gamer zeitgeist, there's this threshold where if a game isn't the one thing you can play for several hours every single day for years on end, that it isn't worth anybody's time. If it can't replace Fortnite or Counter-Strike or Destiny or Minecraft or whatever you're playing most of the time, then it's dead. That's throwing the baby out with the bathwater. But not all games lend themselves to that type of evaluation and criteria. And that's where the Avengers sits. Somewhere in the middle. It's close to a finite experience, more close than it is to the purely recyclable model it's built on and that it claims to be like Destiny. But if you go in with the right expectation and the mindset to have fun with a property that you already enjoy, I don't see how anyone couldn't have a little fun flying around as Iron Man or smashing as Hulk or brawling as Captain America. Marvel's Avengers has a deeply uncertain future, but I really hope it sticks around to live and fight another day. Moon Knight content, please.